we feel your presence. We want you to interact with our parietal lobe so that we understand that oneness with God and are able to then do stuff and say stuff that is in conformity with our great Jesus Christ, our Messiah. So that's the reason behind prayer, and I hope you gain more and more understanding as we go on. I wanted to stick with the book of Ruth today. Yesterday we talked about Naomi, and let me just go over some of the stuff that we did yesterday. We won't be able to go through every single detail, obviously. The book of Ruth is a small book. One of the things I should say is that the book of Ruth does not belong in the Hebrew Bible, where it is found in our English Bible today. Our English Bible follows the Greek translation, which is called the Septuagint, and you cover all that in your classes, isn't it? And the Greek translation reconfigures the Bible so that it becomes more chronological. But the Word of God wasn't given chronologically. It was specifying themes. The book of Ruth in the Hebrew Bible comes after the book of Psalms, the book of Proverbs. You remember we talked about that? Where the final chapter talks about Eshet Chayil, the woman who is physically, emotionally, mentally, economically strong. And then it follows different books. One of them is the book of Ruth, the book of Lamentations, the book of Esther, the book of Song of Songs, where the hero is not Solomon. Solomon wasn't a very nice guy. When he was little, and then he had, grown up to be 20 years old, he was fine. God gave him wisdom. And then something happened to him. Something happens to people as they go older. Don't ask why. But stuff happened to him. So the hero of Song of Songs is the Shulamite, the black woman who Solomon has his eyes on. She is the strong one. That's portrayed in Song of Songs. And Esther, Ruth is one of those here. And yesterday we talked about a little bit about Ruth. So let's go to the next slide. As we go, we want to go way back to creation. This is a series that I did with my students some time ago, where we talked about the Sistine Chapel, and this is beautiful portraits that were made by medieval artists that talks about creation there. And the earth was tohu bohu, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God covering of the waters, says Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2. So it was in a sense of great disarray. It was in a sense of everything was in a dark hole, the black hole there. But then look at what it says. But the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So that God was waiting there to give birth. That becomes the model of our mission today. When we look into the world, we see tohu vabohu. And we go before God and say, God, clear my mind. Halal, give me judgment. How I can interact with a world that is breaking apart. And that's what we find later on in the book of Ruth. So, this is a good portrait from a Jewish philosopher by the name of Franz Rosenzweig, who wrote this book in German. Obviously, books were written in German. Der Stern, Lösung und Erholung der Geborenen, which essentially means the star of salvation. And it goes on to say, there's God on the top of this triangle, and then there is humanity, and then there is the cosmos, there's the land. And long as we have this beautiful interaction between God, humanity, and the land, things go all right. The face of God shines. The problem is that the face of God does not shine, as we saw in the book of Ruth. There is bad things that happen to women, the weak and the vulnerable, where human beings do bad things to each other. Human beings do bad things to God's good creation. And we have the global warming scenario that develops as a result of that. Then, of course, you have a lot of decreation that happens. So our task is not just going and saving one soul and another soul, two souls in our whole lifetime. That is not our mission. Our mission is to save God's whole creation. If we think that we have come to Caleb Institute to save two souls over our lifetime, we have missed our calling. Our calling is to go take the whole universe back to Genesis chapter 1. And we go before God in prayer and say, God, will you reframe my mind so that my mind is in accordance with your will? We go before God with a grocery list of demands. Item number 1, you pray for this. Item number 2, you pray for this. Item number 3. We think that's prayer. That's not prayer. That's nonsense. God knows what he should be doing. We go before God so that our mind, our whole brain, you remember we talked about that, comes in line with God's mind. That is when ministry happens. Otherwise, it doesn't. So, we talked about also the mysteries of the world, and we went through the details here, but we went through Tamar, Rahab, the bride, the Hittite, Mary, and the other Mary, and the other Mary, all those Marys that appeared at the foot of the cross. These were all recreational Marys. They were there to recreate right in the midst of horrible things happening. So the next slide over here, we talked about Eve, right? Where she says, the serpent to God, me. God was there to bring about healing in that situation. And then, of course, right after that is Cain and Abel, where the word Abel, but this means a breath of fresh air. Remember we talked about an inhaling and exhaling. That's the word Abel. He was like a breath of fresh air. And his brother says, you breath of fresh air, I'll make sure that your breath of fresh air is just like this. And he kills him. And God says, Cain, come on, refigure your mind. This whole thing about having an emotional high and emotional low, this anxiety and depression is not going to work well for you. Do something about it. And Cain does not. So he goes and he calls his brother and he says, come on, let's play a game of football or cricket, whatever you play in that field there. Let's do it. And then he brings out his stone, whatever stone he was using, and goes against his brother and kills his brother. God says, Cain, your brother is Adam. Adam, human being. Your brother's blood is Dam, is crying out from the ground, the earth. Adama, your brother Adam, his blood, the Dam, is crying out from the Adama. Those are the cries that we have to hear. Otherwise, we don't know what is God's plan for missions. We have to hear those cries. You see how beautiful Hebrew? Just go to Dr. Praveen Paul. Take all his classes, okay? If you want to know the Bible, it starts in Genesis. Does not start in Matthew. You don't understand Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, unless you understood Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's where it starts. And 2/3 of the Bible is the Old Testament. We talked about the sons of God. So we won't go through details here. The next slide. We talked about Hagar. Through details here. What human beings do as decreation, God recreates out of decreation. That's the key theme that we are going through here. Here we go. Next slide. Come on. We talked about Judah and Tamar, where God recreates and uses a woman to create the world around us. We go to the next slide. We talked about Miriam and the Habiru, the low caste, outcast people called the Habiru, who were interacting with the Aryan Egyptian pharaohs. We talked about Rahab. So this is just going through revising what we have done previously, and we go on to the next slide. And then we went into Ruth chapter 1. It's Ruth among the prophets. It's Ruth among the wisdom literature. We talked about that. So let's go to the next slide. And there were deep models, and we saw those models in Black and the two sons. There, unfortunately, you will find those kinds of people in the church. It's rather sad, but there will be leaders of the church who will be like Elimelech. And like the sons, Mahlon and Chilion. These are what we call the decreation model. So let's the next slide. But then thankfully, there are recreation models. And throughout history, let's face it, people, in the history of the church, God has used women to bring about revivals all over the world. Go to Africa, when I go to Asian countries. Of course, we talk so much about men, but if you go into the details of the history, it's always been women. And I want you to write about this. This group of people are women. Do research work. Dig them out. Write about them. The next generation needs to read about them, hear about them. Our goal. Unfortunately, we haven't done so much of that. So there's Naomi. She forms a recreation mentor model. Recreation mentors are constantly hearing. They're constantly hearing for the voice of God. Recreation mentors are constantly looking. And as they look, they see God appearing, God doing stuff. God is visiting. They arise. Resurrection. Recreation mentors are people who are always rising, along with others around them, like Naomi did. Recreation mentors always expect a visitation of God. And that's one thing I want you to keep in mind. Every day when you get up in the morning, what do you look forward to? Perhaps classes? If there's one question you would ask God and say, God, I want your visitation today, life will be different. Just say, God, break through. I want your visitation today. Please break through. That's what Naomi was looking for. Next slide. Recreation mentors always give choices. We talked about that yesterday. Recreation mentors leave room for expressions of emotions. That is so important. Emotions is an essential part of what is happening in your brain. We talked about that. And we need to give full flow to that. Too often we make our worship to be a very serious singing of hymns, And that's where it ends. But the whole mind, the whole body, our whole spirit needs to be involved in worship. That's what Naomi and Ruth and Orpah did. Recreation mentors recognize that choices in their depth are spiritual choices. And so Oprah made the choice of returning back to her gods. That was familiar to us. Next slide. Ruth chooses to follow her mother-in-law who stuck with her. We talked about that yesterday. Recreation mentoral relationship recognizes resolute and big mentees. That is so powerful. We didn't go through that yesterday, but I like big-headed students, stubborn students. I do not like students who just take down notes and regurgitate that on the exam paper. Those are not good students. Good students challenge you and are big-headed. That's who Ruth was. It's okay to be big-headed. Let's go to the next slide. Recreation models, mentoral relationships, seek resolutions from birth. You know, Naomi says, don't call me Naomi, don't call me Naomi. El Shaddai has given me nothing else but bitterness. Mary. So who's El Shaddai? I think that's a wrong translation. The word Shaddai actually it means breasts. It is God is Father, but God is also Mother. That is what Naomi is referring to as she talks about God, recreation, mentoral relationship, seeks resolutions from the birth. That God is going to make something good to happen, just like a mother would for her child. And she goes to the place during barley harvest. Barley harvest was a time when God released the people from slavery and took them out of Egypt. That's when barley harvest happens, during the time of Passover. And she knew that God was going to do something special at that very special time, which is called Passover. Next slide. Recreation meant Naomi trusts mentees to take risks. And that's something we did not go through, but that's found in Ruth chapter 2, where she goes there and it says that, people leave space there for gleaning, did this, refuse. That's nonsense. The Hebrew word that's used there to say, it says, come on in and take from the bounty. That is what good recreational leaders do. Recreation leaders are those that say, I'm going to be generous. This whole business of tithing and giving tithe of your income is a bunch of nonsense. If you talk to Dr. Praveen Paul, he'll tell you that 10th was just the minimum. You were supposed to be giving another 10%, another 10%, another 10%. Give everything. That is what recreation mentors do. Recreation mentors introduce mentees to other mentors with whom they have intimate knowledge. And so this whole aspect of handing people on to the next person is a very important theme in how ministry and mission happens. She trusted Naomi. Next slide. Recreation mentors know the mettle of new mentors. So there's this guy called Boaz. Boaz is a nice guy. It just means the strong one. Powerful one. Naomi knew that there was something special about this person. And she trusted the person. He was also, it's called Chayil, and the English translation says that he was a person of great wealth. Again, nonsense. Some translations are nonsense translations. I'm sorry to say that. But the word Chayil is the same word that's used of Eshet Chayil. Do you remember that? Proverbs chapter 31, the woman of Proverbs 31 was an Eshet Chayil. Boaz is called a Chayil. And here's what I get out of it. Those people who are truly strong, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually are not threatened by other people who are equally strong mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, especially if they are women. Show me a strong person. A strong person is one who says, I'm so thankful that God has brought you in my direction. You are strong. You're stronger than me. Come, let's go hand in hand together. You take the lead. That's what strong mentors do. And remember that when you go into ministry, because you'll find people who will come in your life who are supposed to be low down there. And our culture says keep them down there. The biblical culture says no. Treat them as Eshet Chayil. Treat them as strong people. Recreation mentors enable mentees to follow God's calling. That's what Naomi does. She says, you go, girl. I know that this is a place which is going to be hard for you. You don't know the culture, you don't know the people, you don't know the language. When you go there, people will want to take advantage of you. And you know that, right? When you go to Delhi, people want to take advantage of you because you look different. You look different, you speak differently, and so on and so forth. But Naomi says, you go, God will provide. Recreation mentors are known for their generosity, and we talked about that already. Let's go to the next slide. Recreation mentors are not scared of I don't know why I put war, or their relationship with God on their sleeves, that should be wearing their relationship with God on their sleeves. And the Lord be with you. And I really liked it. Yesterday when Dr. Powell was talking about Maninder, he was starting to meet there. And we have this model that strong leaders do not weep. That is nonsense. We should always be ready to bear our emotions on our sleeves. That's what good mentors do. Recreation mentors always look out for the other among themselves. And that's what Boaz does. He goes to his young lads and he says, well, who are all the people here? I care about them. And where are that woman who looks different? And of course, the young lads say, oh, she's from Moab. And you know how those people in Moab are, right? We can take advantage of her. Why? Because she's from Moab. You know what Boaz said? Don't you dare touch her. That's what recreation mentors do. Recreation mentors understand that sadly the Moabite will always be treated like a Moabite and will always be the other. Next slide. Recreation mentors of the opposite sex treat them as sisters. I love it when Boaz says, my God. That's the solution to the Me Too movement problems, right? If only we treat people, especially people of the opposite sex, we treat them as my sister, my cousin, my daughter, things will be all right. Why do people do bad things to each other? Because they think they are the other. They are like the other. Recreation mentors protect vulnerable among themselves. I have commanded the young man not to dare touch you. Recreation mentors always provide other mentors where he says, why don't you make friends with the young women? And that's very important. I think that is crucial for you students there to make sure that you have 3, 4, 5 people that you can nurture. And look out for them. Young women, find 2, 3, 4, 5 people. You're not here just for yourself. Find how you can nurture them and take care of them. Next slide. We're going through all this very, very quickly, right? Recreation mentors. Next slide. Recreation mentors always transform the weak and the vulnerable into people of renown. Where Ruth says, and we did not read this, but in chapter 2, she says that I am a Nakari, foreigner, Why do you treat me like a noteworthy person, Nata? This is a very, very fine line. Our goal as recreation ministers should be, this person is abusively treated. How can I transform this person into a person of noteworthiness so that no one will mistreat that person ever? When you do that, people will say, I want to follow your Jesus. Who is this that's enabling you to do this? I want to follow Jesus. Nakar, Nakari to Nakar. Next slide. Recreation mentors always recreate economic and social system in new persons. So I'll say a couple of things now, because this passage was read to us in Luke chapter 4. We are obviously not covering every single aspect because we don't have the time to do that. But you remember that when our sister read that passage, it said something like, Boaz says to this person, and that you have to acquire or buy the woman. You have to acquire or buy the land. And he says, sure, I can acquire or buy the land. I have a lot of money to give away, that's fine. Boaz says, no, on the day that you, whatever it means, buy or acquire the land, you also buy or acquire the woman. That's a horrible translation. Because the word there is not to buy or to acquire. Boaz did not buy Ruth. Boaz did not acquire Ruth. The Hebrew word there, Kana, means to recreate. When God revealed himself to Melchizedek in Genesis chapter 14, Melchizedek blesses Abraham. You read all about that in your classes. And he says, blessed be the God, the Kana, Taniti, the creator, recreator of heaven and earth. That is our mission, is to recreate a new person, a new society, not just to win one soul or the other. Our business is to recreate a new economy and a new person where there will be no caste system at all. It'll be a casteless society. It'll be a classless society. A new personhood and a new economy. That is the basic thesis statement of the book of Ruth. And that is the mission that God has given to us as Christians here, as followers of Jesus, because he is the great Redeemer, isn't it? And his mission to us is go and recreate. Open your eyes, recreate a new economy, a new society, new birth. That is not just one person or two people, but a whole system. That is what Boaz accomplished, and that is our mission. Let's pray.